Technical Compilations, for example, RTC, became the Religious Technology Center. And I don't know whether this is his affection for numerology, that things had to add up to the right thing, which we were never told about. But so with CS, you can be CS'd by a CS who is a CS.
That's right. That's right. All the above. So,
Yep.
and the C/S is usually used in Scientology for the case supervisor, or CS, right? Or the case supervisor's instructions. So this booklet is well over 100 pages, and I threw it into a PDF. I scanned it and put it into a PDF, and what I was madly correcting this morning is I missed a bunch of pages. So I thought I'd scan the entire thing beginning to end, but I'd actually missed a bunch, and so I was madly filling in the blanks there today. And let me pull this up here because we're going to sort of walk through this. Now, I don't think we're going to get through the entire book today. This thing is I think over 200 pages.
So we won't have achieved OT8 by the end of this session, I'm afraid.
Afraid not. But let me make sure that as I flip through the pages here, that those are updated. Yes, they are. Excellent. So I'm trying out all this new fancy stuff here today. So here's the contents of it. And we're not going to go through this. I just want you to see there's a lot here. And this is, let's go ahead and go to here's our introduction right here. I put it on 2 pages because it requires a 2-page spread for some of the definitions and illustrations and such that go through this book. And here it is right here. It's telling you, introduction, the Scientology CS1, this booklet, is a precise series of steps to familiarize you with basic auditing terms and procedures. A full understanding of these terms and procedures is vital to ensure you achieve maximum gains and speed of progress up the bridge. So my contention, my thesis, right, here, the thing I'm putting forward is that this is actually so important and so necessary to the Scientology process that if you don't do this, or you don't have these understandings before you're going in for auditing, before you receive your very first auditing command or question, that the auditing probably won't even work. And by work, I mean draw you through the series of things that Scientology auditing is doing to you so that you will achieve what John and I constantly are talking about with these euphoric states, or these blissful awe moments that this induces. We talk
very good
right?
indicators.
Yes.
Very good indicators.
There we go.
Scientology. Yeah.
That's right. That's
and
what
look, there's a contradiction right at the start here, and let's put this down.
Yep.
That the way you trap somebody psychologically is you give them a double bind. You give them a conflict that they cannot resolve. And here is the conflict in this first paragraph. Let's now refer to the auditor's code, whereby this is something that every auditor has to do. And in the auditor's code, it says never evaluate for the pre-clear. And this booklet is evaluating for the pre-clear. It's telling you what to expect. And, you know, expectation, conditions, experience. I've been saying that for many years now. That we tend to see and experience what we expect to see and experience to a large extent.
That's it. That's what I'm talking about. There has been a term in psychology called priming that has been used to sort of talk about or describe an aspect of this where you set expectations or you set up a person for what they're going to experience or what is about to happen or what they should think or believe about a thing. And
as with several other terms in psychology, it's a term borrowed from hypnotism. That was where it was, I think, first used. You prime somebody by... You know, it's like when you're watching a movie and there's a picture of a telephone in the movie, and then the camera goes away. You know the phone is going to ring, but everything has a setup shot. Everything is getting your attention to go in that direction. And this is a long series of setup shots. That's
exactly it. That's exactly it. And this has been my contention, and John and I have talked about this for years. You know, for a very long time, is that this is one of the key ways that they get ya. so to speak. And it just looks like education, but it's not. There's twists and turns here. And so I thought we've been talking about it, describing it, trying to get it across to folks. And I thought when somebody sent this to me, one of my wonderful viewers out there, I thought, here's an opportunity to actually walk through step by step. And we don't have to necessarily hit every step or every note of this, but we can hit some of the important beats and sort of see what it is that they're setting you up for when you go into Scientology. So the idea here is that this booklet is something that every single Scientology pre-clear, anybody who's going to get auditing in Scientology, they're going to have to do this. They're going to have to sit down in a room. And by the way, this is paid for. You got to pay for this. This is part of the auditing time.
Hey. Has everybody here paid? Because...
Yes, exactly.
Chris says you got to pay for it.
You got to pay for it. So this is part of your paid auditing. It took me, I remember when I was very first going to get some auditing as a student, free auditing from another student in the classroom, learning how to be an auditor back in Santa Barbara back in the day. It took 3 full sessions just to cover this material.
So for us to explain, it's going to take, what, about 30?
Oh, at least.
Hold on to your seat.
That's right. So here we go. Let's just get into it then. So basic Scientology basic definitions. Okay, and this is where I thought we might start having an interesting time, because right here, Scientology is taken from the Latin word scio, which means knowing in the fullest sense of the word, and the Greek word logos, meaning study of. In itself, the word means literally knowing how to know. And I love this expanded definition, further defined as the study and handling of the spirit in relationship to itself, universes, and other life.
Well, let's take the basic principle of Scientology, that for something to persist, it must have a lie entered into it. There must be a deception if the thing is to persist in time. So there must be a lie in this, according to Ron Hubbard. Now, the first part is it's incredibly unusual if you're making portmanteau words where you push 2 ideas together. You would normally use all Greek or all Latin. So if we move aside, and he says that scio comes from scienta, which is the root of science, which is a Latin word. And if we say, well, what does scio... because there is no such word, in fact, in Latin, I'm told. What does scio, and there may be somebody out there who knows better than I do, that often happens, unfortunately. What does scio mean in Greek? Is there anybody there who's looked up scio in Greek? Because I have, and it means a shadow or a shade, which is to say, it's a word for a dead person, a ghost. It's a word for something that doesn't really exist. So Scientology, to make it as is, to make it go away, to get rid of the lie in it, Scientology is the study of shadows. That's what we've actually got here.
Isn't that interesting? Or the study of nothing.
Well, and nothing is such an important idea in Scientology because it's the first idea, isn't it? Life is basically a static. It has no mass, no meaning, no motion. That's you, that is. You are nothing. And you're represented with a 0 in Scientology.
Exactly.
And that's what you'll become. When you've spent all of your money, your bank account will have 0 in it, and you will be nothing.
Exactly. I always thought there was some, I don't know even what the word is. It's just so,
Hokum.
There it is. Yeah, I mean, it's such a, it's one of these things like with scio, like if Hubbard was aware of that and used that and knew that, it's one of those he kind of things, It's sort of one of those, it's one of those things I think Hubbard really enjoyed getting one over on people in this really obvious, blatant way, right? Like, I'm going to make nothing out of all of you. I always thought there was something kind of funny in that, kind of like, I'm going to, that it's hiding in plain sight, the reality of what he's really doing. And
they're often very childish, his jokes. So, that when he got back from London in the early 50s and gave a lecture and said, all of you have spent lifetimes in Arslicus. He'd heard the term Arslicus.
Exactly.
And, and all of you are, him addressing his audience. That's what they were as far as he was concerned. And he was right. They were paying $500 each back in like 1954 or something to listen to this man insulting them.
That's right. I just think that there's it's just such a twist. It's just such a funny thing to see that kind of openly like that, to get in on the in joke, to realize, oh, there is an in joke here, that whole thing. Now, I also think that this definition of the study and handling of the spirit in relationship to itself, universes, and other life is one of these, like, what kind of definitions? It sounds so metaphysical and important and significant. And what's it really saying? Study of the spirit in relationship to itself, universes, and other life. I don't think that's what Scientology really is.
Yeah, Perry Chapdelaine, who was involved with Hubbard very early on, was a mathematician. I was in touch with him way back in the 80s, and he said one day Hubbard said, "Come on over and bring a bottle of scotch. We've got to make this into a science." And because Perry was an academic mathematician, they sat down and they wrote the Dianetic axioms. And the whole point was to make it, and you've got lambda. Did you ever come across lambda in your time in Scientology? You've not just got theta, or theta as the English meant to say, but you've got lambda, which kind of went off somewhere, had a bit of mint sauce on it or something. And this incredible science-y, make it sound science-y,
Exactly.
And what does it mean? I spent a couple of hours with a woman many, many years ago saying, the axioms of Scientology are nonsense. And she said, no, they're not. They're absolutely, scientifically. And I said, well, okay, space is a viewpoint of dimension. And she said, I'll explain that to you. 2 hours later, she accepted that it's a tautology. It doesn't actually say anything. Space is a viewpoint of dimension. What's dimension? It's it's seeing something. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It just kind of meets itself in the tail, in the head and the tail, right? Yeah, it's goofy stuff, and yet it sounds. And I think that God, there's hundreds of those Dianetic axioms too. That's the thing. Is the key there was, let's make it sound sciencey. Not let's actually do some science. Let's just make it sound that way with some Greek letters and stuff,
Well, science would involve experiments. And as far as I know, there are only 2 experiments that were conducted in Dianetics or Scientology. One by the University of Chicago, which said Dianetics is nonsense. And the other by the original Los Angeles Foundation, which Hubbard refers to in Science of Survival, that they knocked somebody out. And then said things to them.
That's right.
It's not very nice. And they were unable to recover any of what had been said, which is not really surprising, because we know that memories are not laid down when you're unconscious. So the whole concept of the engram kind of explodes, I'm afraid.
Exactly.
That's why boxers don't remember the 10 seconds before they were knocked out, because the memory's not been incorporated. All to do with potassium and iodine, I'm told. Beyond my pay grade.
Yeah, it's a little above my pay grade, but I do know for a fact human memory does not work the way L. Ron Hubbard suggests or claims it does. That's for sure.
I know pretty much that nothing works the way L. Ron Hubbard claims it does. Such a con artist.
Such a con. All right. Well, let's take a look at what else we have here. So this is what now I want everybody to remember, though, as much as we're going to lambaste and take this apart and criticize this is what every single Scientologist, and I do mean every one of them, has to go through, has to learn, and has to agree with.
If they are ever to become self-determined.
Exactly. And become
do what they're told.
That's right. Become cause over their own existence. And here we start, right? The Thetan The Thetan is the being himself, who's aware of being aware. Not his name, body, mind, or anything else. It's you from the Greek letter theta, right? And then we have this concept of the mind. And this is where and you know, theta is sort of like, okay, you can't prove it. I mean, I can't disprove it, but I can't disprove that there isn't a teacup, you know, flying around Jupiter right now either. It doesn't mean there is one.
I think there is.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to put something forward like this, and this has always been my biggest problem with L. Ron Hubbard and his and the way he goes about doing things, or the way he goes about asserting truth, the biggest break from reality is right here. This is the point where you have to buy into this as a faith-based concept. This is not a scientific fact. And Scientologists blur that reality to the point of delusion, where they actually believe, because L. Ron Hubbard wrote this, that it's a scientific fact that theta exists.
80,000 hours of research, as he claims, in Fundamentals of Thought, I think it is, which is actually 40 years of a 40-hour week, and he was 43 when he said this, so he was 3 when he started researching. There are little tricks underneath everything. So why did he choose this particular letter of the Greek alphabet? Because theta, or theta, as the British say, is a Greek letter. Why did he choose this one? It took me years before I saw the solution to this problem, and it was quite accidental. I was looking at a Roman mural which had a gladiatorial combat in it. And above the dead gladiators was the theta symbol.
Really?
It means a discarnate spirit. It doesn't mean the being. It means the dead spirit, the defeated spirit. And it was, okay, there we go. Dead in the head, or dead out of the head.
You're kidding.
Yeah, would that I were.
Wow. How do you think that's another one of his in jokes?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was told this story. It came from L. Ron Hubbard Jr.'s son, and he said that his father had told him, and Nibs, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., from 1952 to 1959 was the second in command of Scientology. And he left because his dad wouldn't pay him enough money to keep his children, and he needed to have money. He wasn't upset or anything, and then his father set about destroying him and spent the rest of his life doing that, because he was an expert on parenting. I may be being a little bit deadpan and ironic there, who knows. But Nibs said that at these congresses they'd have, where they'd hit people up for $500, that his father would take him aside and he'd say, I wonder if we can get them to do this. You know, so I wonder if we can get them to shout at an ashtray, for example. And so there are a lot of these things going on, which are actually seeing how far you can push somebody before they realize that they've been taken in. And what he found out was that, you know, the sunk cost fallacy, that once you've invested in something, you'll tend to keep going in the same direction. I call it inertia. Spike tells me I ought to call it momentum, but there you go. A body will tend to continue to move in the direction it is moving, or not move if it's not moving. And so we keep going, because the Nigerian prince has taken the first $10 and is now asking for 100 more, 1,000 more, 10,000 more, 300. And so we keep on going. So once you've got somebody to do something that's fundamentally stupid, I'll throw this little story in. I talked to a woman. This is when I first left. This was in December 1983. I had a list of people to talk to who might be disaffected with Scientology. And in 6 weeks, I talked with, I think, 38. No, it was 38 people in one day, actually. I come to think about it. Oh, dear. Those were raucous times. But I went to visit this guy, and he wasn't there. His wife was there. And I talked with her, and she'd been involved in Scientology 15 years. 15 years. And as yet, she had not graduated the first training routine, because the training routines say that you must have a major, stable win. And she, being the only sensible person I've ever met who's been in Scientology, said, how do you know it's stable? How can you possibly know that it's stable? So you're already being asked to lie. You're already being asked to agree to something that's not quite right. This is the increment of dissonance. The idea that you get somebody, you know, it was a psychologist, a forensic psychologist called Brian Tully, wonderful man. And he gave a talk and he said, most white collar criminals will say, but I got to the office this one day and the boss said, could you backdate that contract to yesterday? And once you've done that, the next step will be something more. Exactly the same as with the mafia. You do them a little favor, or they do you a little favor, and now they'll tell on you. They'll snitch on you if you don't do the next thing. So with Scientology, it's just constant, this thing of accepting something that's not quite right and going along with it. How do you know it's going to be major? How do you know it's going to be stable? And what on earth does a win mean? You know, that thing of all of these claims about curing cancer and raising people from the dead and having, you know, never be catching a cold, and all of these things have been promised right from the start. Nobody ever achieved these things. And so we sort of thought, well, other people are achieving them. There must be something wrong with me.
Oh, absolutely. And you just haven't had the right process yet. You haven't had the right cognition yet. You haven't, you know, audited out the right engram yet. You know, it's always something more to do.
The next level.
That's
the next course. And you'd see people just like Amazon, you know, you order something and by the time it arrives, you're bored. You want the next thing. And Scientology's like that. It bothered me seriously when I did the academy levels, class 0 to 4. I went up, I did 0, 1, and 2. But when I started on them, seeing how eager people were to sign off the check sheet so they could get onto the next thing. And I'd come and say, look, this thing about the tone scale and these contradictions between what it says in Hypnosis and the tone scale and Scientology 8008, it says completely different things. And you realize you've just got to accept it. If you want to keep going, whatever seems like a red flag, whatever seems like a contradiction, just push it aside. Sorry about that. And keep going. You know, stacking up these misunderstandings as you go.
Exactly. And here and sometimes I think the subtleties of this can be subtle too. Sometimes they're pretty, you know, out there, and sometimes they are pretty. Like the word Thetan comes from the Greek letter theta, which represents thought or life. And I hadn't really thought about that differentiation before until I was going through this. Thought or life. These are not the same things. Thought is something life does, but life is doing way more than that. And how is that supposed to work? How's that supposed to be a thing, you know?
Well, and it gets very confusing. I mean, psychology, you have psyche from psyche, which means the spirit, study of the spirit, which is what we're meant to be talking about here, or the study of butterflies. Because literally a psyche is a butterfly, but it's said that the spirit, when it leaves the body, inhabits butterflies, if you believe a certain strand of Greek thinking. And I think we're kind of in that sort of place. We need a Greek expert to tell us whether the Greeks have ever thought that this letter in their alphabet represented the individual. Hubbard at first, of course, talked about the Theta being. Thetan was a later thing. So he starts out with the idea that you've got matter, energy, space, and time, and then you've got thought. That's how it begins, which is not particularly new idea. But consciousness is distinct from matter, energy, space, and time. And he then extends it so that it means thought or life. And as you say, you're kind of stuck with that. What on earth does that actually mean, that thought and life are the same thing? You know, when I'm growing a tomato, the fact that it's got life, does that mean it's thinking? And what is it thinking? Is it thinking L. Ron Hubbard's going to come along and stick a nail in me, you know, and see if it upsets me?
That's right. But these little things can become real sticklers. They can really mess with you later, you know, in implanting these ideas or in accepting or educating somebody, if you will, in these ideas. It becomes fuzzy. It's thought or it's life, or it's this or it's that. Like, it's not super clear. But the person kind of walks away from this thinking it is clear. And everybody in the group seems to think this is all so clear. This is all so understandable. So I must accept this because if I don't understand it or question it or have a problem with it, well, it's me, and so I have to suppress that. That's a big part of Scientology, the Scientology experience, I think.
And I think it's general to cultic systems and aberrant belief systems that you have to accept that you're inferior and that the boss, the guru, the Führer, the dictator, a word that Hubbard also used, is superior. And it's interesting that, I mean, I had a very bad feeling when I saw that Hubbard used the word indoctrination. This is not education. This is indoctrination. It's putting the doctrine into you.
That's right.
And again, it's in complete opposition to the idea that you'll be self-determined, which is to say, able to think for yourself. As long as you agree with Ron Hubbard, you will be able to think for yourself. You'll never be able to discover any technology. Only Hubbard is capable of doing that. Though, of course, in the first few years, he wrote great long lists of all the people he'd taken ideas from, including Anaxagoras. And I've never actually worked out what came from Anaxagoras. Don't even know who he was, actually.
Oh, wow.
Probably Greek by the sound of it. You know,
Sounds
it's all
Greek.
Greek to me.
It's all Greek to me. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now moving right over from theta to mind, and these are crucial concepts in Scientology. So the fact that they are defined in such loosey-goosey terms is kind of significant, right? Because this is supposed to prep you for your auditing, and as John was mentioning, right, double binds. Watch for double binds. So here we have the mind, and the mind is, now we're going to have some actual indoctrination happening, because first off, there is this concept that the mind is the accumulated recordings of thoughts, conclusions, decisions, observations, and perceptions of a Thetan throughout his entire existence. Okay, so how is that different from theta as thought exactly? I'm not sure.
Why is it the mind doesn't do the thinking? And if we've existed for 1.25 quadrillion years, and we've taken a mental image picture, 24 a second, same as a movie camera, oddly enough, or the old movie cameras. If we've been doing that, how many pictures is that? Is there anybody there that can do the math on that? 24 a second for 1.25 quadrillion years.
Oh, I thought it was...
How big a bag would you need to hold that many mental image pictures? And how would you carry it around with you? And if that's all your mind is, that it's just a collection basically of slides,
yep,
which have, you know, Aldous Huxley's word feelies in them. You know, they're all of the perceptics, as Hubbard said. That's all you've got. How do you organize these things? There's nothing in Scientology to tell you how that functions. It just happens. It's magic, you know.
Exactly. And it gets worse because you know, even if you go deep, even if you go beyond this, and when I don't want to go too far afield out of what we're covering today, but even if you go beyond this material to the deeper materials of Scientology, you still end up with the mind is sheets of energy. Mental image pictures are sheets of energy that you're mocking up or creating, you know, through all these moments, and then you can recreate them at will or something. It's a very loosey-goosey concept, because it's kind of like Hubbard says, well, no, you're not carrying them all around with you all the time, but you are. It's again, double binds. It's like you are, but you aren't, you know?
You can erase them during auditing. So it used to be that you'd refile them from the reactive mind to the analytical mind. But then in auditing, you were being asked if the image is erasing. Well, then where does it go? And and how many pictures have you got in the reactive mind and how many in the analytical mind? And does it really matter? Because neither of these minds does anything other than being a kind of library or a museum of images that you've somehow by magic got to manipulate. There's no depth to this. You know,
exactly.
What I was saying about memory before comes from Eric Kandel, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on memory, which is, I mean, we know that Hubbard wanted a Nobel Prize and tried, you know, there was this project to try and get him one after he died. And David Miscavige would not take the answer that you can't have a posthumous Nobel Prize. That's one of the rules. It's like, well, get the rules changed so he can have one, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, okay.
Whole thing is a little silly. Let me move me over here for a moment so you can see this whole picture of the mind. as it's laid out there with all these pictures. And this is the concept you get from Dianetics and Scientology, as we've gone over right from the get-go. But there's more, right? Because it then says that the mind is not the brain, which they define as that part of the body inside the head that uses the nerves to send out instructions to various parts of the body. Well, that's one thing the brain is doing, but that's pretty inadequate description. But the mind is not the brain. The mind is the system that a Thetan uses to communicate and control people and things in the world around him. The system that a Thetan uses to communicate and control people and things. So it's not just bunches of pictures, but somehow we're supposed to draw from this illustration of all these pictures that there's some other system in place here that this mind is utilized for to control and communicate to people and things. Doesn't tell you how, doesn't tell you any of the mechanics of it, just this is what it is, and you're carrying it around with you. I think that is got to be the, when I talk about loosey-goosey, like, what are you talking about? I have so many questions right now, Yeah,
and we come to what is called the hard problem of consciousness that has obsessed philosophers for millennia, and Hubbard doesn't even come close to saying this is what consciousness is. No. He's just got these little stick figures, this kind of kindergarten set of drawings to try and bullshit us into giving him a load of money, which we did.
Yeah, exactly, which we did. Exactly. But I wanted people to see like how kind of lame this stuff is, like when you get up close and personal with it, and you try to engage with it in a real way, you'd go crazy trying to figure this stuff out. It doesn't really make sense.
And the thought that the brain is just a switching system. Now, we don't really know as much about the brain as people say, but what we do know is that there are, perhaps 80 or 90 billion neurons, the same amount of glial cells. This year, they've actually found a third kind of cell, which is kind of funky. And you have this situation that, unlike a computer, and the only comparison that Hubbard ever gave us was to a computer back in 1950, when a computer was, of course, a calculator, so you could hold down a number. But unlike a computer, you're not dealing in zeros and ones.
That's right.
The neuron synapse, you can have a host of chemical interactions. You can have electrical impulses. You can even have physical movement between neurons. And you have all of these pathways, the complexity of which is such that any human being has the same potential of processes in the brain as there are atoms in the universe.
Exactly.
And this is reduced to, this is a kind of switching system. It's like a telephone exchange. It's like, not really. It's a bit more, the 200 brain regions, what's going on. And it fascinates me, the phobia that Hubbard managed to induce in Scientologists about psychiatry, psychology, psychotherapy, and the brain. It's a switching system, so you don't need to know about it.
That's right.
It's kind of like Richard Dawkins saying, we don't, God's nonsense, so we can forget about theology. Now, I'm not a believer in God, but I'm fascinated by, if we're going to throw the baby out, let's keep the bathwater. Yeah. Thousands of years of the cleverest minds stewing and trying to work out what's going on. I'm sad to say Ron Hubbard was not one of those cleverest minds.
No, he was not at all. And it really needs to be emphasized. What you just said is actually about as much lip service as Hubbard actually gave to the brain. It's really minimal. It is very minimalistic in Scientology. It is sort of just kind of thrown into a bucket and forget about it. You don't need to know about this. All your brain is. And I was taught this. I remember literally arguing with other children when I was 7 years old, right? We talk about growing up with Scientology concepts. This was actually one of the things I argued with other children at the time when I was a kid was, your brain is just a switchboard. It's no big thing. It's the spirit that's the big deal. I'm trying to proselytize this crap. I don't even understand it, right? And
I hope you're getting 10% from all these kids.
And they were making just horrible fun of me. I was not having fun with this at all. And I really thought there was this thing, right? That this thing, oh, it's just a switchboard. It's just a little, and that was actually, the telephone switchboard was actually exactly the kind of concept you'd have of this, you know, sort of brain gremlin or something in there, just switching the connections. And as you just broke down, right, it is, the brain is the single most complicated organism or thing we as human beings know about. Like, period. Just numerically speaking, it is almost an infinitely complex mechanism, and yet every single one of us carry one around. It's amazing.
80 to 90,000 million neurons capable of up to 200 connections each.
Here it is.
And activities at one time. Just this incredible, wonderful, brilliant. The result of evolution that's gone, and all Hubbard's got in 1.25 quadrillion years. I was talking with Mike Rinder about this, and he'd spend days with Ron Hubbard, just the two of them alone, and Hubbard would just keep on talking about racing atomic powered cars, you know, and that seems to have been what he did for 1.25 quadrillion years. I'd get bored of that after a week.
Exactly. Exactly.
And dull bodies and this meat bodies, this disdain for evolution and the beauty of the world and what has eventuated from the 13.8 billion years that our universe appears to have existed for.
Yeah. It's wildly out of touch. It's wildly out of touch stuff. But this mind stuff, this Theta mind stuff, I wanted to cover this. I mean, obviously they're covering it early, and I wanted to show you what they're covering with people so that you also understand. Here we are just pointing out some very obvious, you know, we're just kind of having fun with this and poking at the most obvious things about it that are wrong. But Scientologists really think, and I used to think,
that 7 years old,
that this was a complete subject. That all you needed to know was this, and you were going to be totally set. And you wonder, you know, why it is that Scientologists would adopt such an arrogant, conceited attitude. It's because they have to, because if you challenge a Scientologist on this stuff, they have no answers. They can't talk to you intelligently about the brain and the switchboards and the neurons and all that stuff, because, well, it's just not important in Scientology, so therefore it's not important, period. And in the place of that knowledge, you have to substitute arrogance and conceit and ego, because that's all you got, you know? I think
it's rather like, saying, well, the body's just a physiological unit.
Right.
And you don't need to know anything about it. You don't need, hands, feet, eyes. They're just, you don't. And dismissing the most complicated part of us in that way, not appreciating its complexity is childish. Of course, he used to, in the original formulation in Dianetics, there was a file clerk.
Right.
Or file clerk.
File clerk.
If you're American. Yeah. Who, from the word cleric, who, these little things that are somewhere inside you that are running around putting in all the plugs in the old telephone switchboard. It's kind of silly. And it's like somebody getting a transistor radio or, a computer, a central processing unit and going, well, yeah, this is just the fuzzy bit that's in the middle.
That's right.
You don't actually need this. You just have to have the intention that your computer will work and images will appear on the screen.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Really.
No, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And just to really blow the whole computer thing away, in case that hasn't been done already. Computers are binary, right? It's zeros and ones. It's transistors and circuits, and it's in a yes state or a no state, an on or an off, right? And that's it. That's all you got. Imagine if every single one of those on-off stations actually had 100 different possible combinations, not just on or off, but 100 different values could be represented by every single one of those. And then you have something on the order of 30 or 40 different ways that those on-off switches, that those switches can be connected to each other. Neurotransmitters come in all different shapes and sizes. They're not just one. So the number of combinations of things we're talking about here, if you just want to look at it purely from a math point of view, just with that, is already blowing away every math, sort of idea you might have about this.
It's pretty much the difference between 2 on and off, and 10 to the power 42.
Yeah, there we go.
It's got to be 42 because that's Douglas Adams' favorite number. But when you see how many zeros that is, those are the possibilities at any given moment. I got very into this when I was writing Opening Our Minds. What kind of model can you give? And it's like, well, say that you had a sphere and within it you had 80 billion little individual nodes that could be any color. They could be dark or light. They could be any of the 80,000 shades that the human eye, shades and tones that the human eye can recognize. And there are 80,000 million of them. And that is, you've got the neurotransmitters, you have serotonin and dopamine and all of these lovely things going on, neuropeptides. You've got the hormonal system, which is also related to this. And if you actually move serotonin from one part of the brain to another, in one part of the brain it does one thing, and in another part it does another.
Exactly.
And then you've got the simple potassium iodine chemistry that's going on in there, just so beautiful, so remarkably complicated. This very thought that when I speak a sentence, I don't have to construct it first. It just emerges out of this place. So we're able to think our way in real time. And compared to this, it's like comparing a Ferrari to a cardboard box.
That's right.
Hubbard's model of humanity is pretty much a cardboard box. It's this not quite three-dimensional idea that he's got going. And he's got to sell you on it. And he's not the only con man or woman in the world. There are thousands of systems out there. You get into the theosophical system and your astral bodies and your etheric body and all of this stuff. And once you started doing this, I was talking to Joe Zimhart this week, and he was saying, well, in the Church Universal and Triumphant, you have 4 bodies above your own body. You have the Christ body and this body, and you visualize them so hard that you experience them. And it made me think about this woman who was in the awful New Kadampa tradition, a new tradition. That's really a problem for me. And what you're meant to do there is visualize the now dead, thankfully, guru, so that he is always with you. And I heard of a case of somebody who ended up in a psychiatric hospital because they couldn't get rid of this thing. And it made me go, well, in Scientology, you're kind of visualizing all of these ideas and seeing the world, interpreting the world. Your reality is being interpreted for you in this way.
That's right.
And it diminishes you. It makes you small. And at the other end, of course, it makes you feel superior. So you've got all these tiny people going around who've never had a thought in their lives because Ron Hubbard won't let you, who believe that they're really special. And when it comes down to it, that kind of narcissistic self-respect is about all you'll get out of Scientology. You'll think you're fabulous and turn into Danny Masterson if you're really unlucky.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to see why it is that, one, exactly what you just said, how people can become so simplistic as Scientologists, but it's the delusions of grandeur that make it awful. It would be funny if it wasn't, if the personality changes involved in this and the ego changes involved in this were not so ugly. And they are. Almost uniformly they are.
Well, we've talked about this, and I won't get into any detail here, but since May I've been researching the life and times of Charles Manson, and I started out sort of thinking, well, the fact that he did 14 months of Scientology in prison is going to be relevant. After I'd spent a little time with it, I went, the murders wouldn't have happened without him studying Scientology, because it's Scientology that led him down that route. And a lot of that is the narcissistic self-obsession, the idea that you are, in his case, Jesus, of course. He came to believe that he was. Yep. And that, there is nothing good that's going to come out of that. And, not much that's good has really come out of Scientology. It's ruined quite a lot of talents. I'm sure that Chick Corea would have achieved so much more if he'd not been involved in Scientology. He's such a brilliant man. And I think that's often the case, that you're actually believing that you are a god, but you're actually in submission all the time to Ron Hubbard and his really childish ideas of the world.
Exactly. Well, exactly right. And moving on with those ideas, we've covered Theta and we've covered mind. Now we go a little bit further and we get, of course, body, the complete physical structure of a human being. The body is not the person himself. And we already had that the brain is not the mind. And now we get that the body is not the person himself, right? There's this external thing called a thetan, and that's what you really are. And this is where you're really starting to be set up for failure. I can't emphasize this enough from a psychological perspective, how fucked up this is, because it creates this.
Is that a technical term, fucked up?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm gonna use it very technically here. Because it really does set you up for failure. It sets you up for, it's a key principle, which is why I'm going to harp on it for a second, because you have to believe you are not you. You have to. And I'm sorry to tell people this, but your body, that's you. That is who you are.
And person, personify, even if you are a spirit, you are personified in the world through your body and mind. For me, one of the real difficulties after Scientology, after 9 years of believing this, even though I wasn't humiliated and abused like everybody else in Scientology, pretty much, was this contempt for the body.
Yeah.
The idea that it's just, you can drop this thing, you can leave this thing, you can, and coming to the point where I'm saying, I am the composite. The person, the self, the him in the himself, is all of this together. It's not, and I think Hubbard, because he was always sick, because, he was overweight, he smoked 100 cigarettes a day. He always had something wrong, something going on. He had terror stomach, as he defined it, because he believed he had ulcers. They didn't find any with the x-rays, but he was anxious. Of course he was anxious, because any minute he could be found out. Any minute somebody could see through him, and people often did. And so he lived in this phobic state, which is a kind of bipolar state, where he'd be really high because he'd think he'd cured his ills, and then he'd be really low. Scientology is all about this mind, body, spirit relationship, because in February 1938, Ron Hubbard had his wisdom teeth extracted under nitrous oxide, and he would say that he was dead for 8 minutes during that time, and he left his body. He went exterior from the body. And his whole life after that was the failed attempt to get out of his body. Well, I'm relatively happy with my body, aged though it may be. And I quite like being personified. I like being, having a nose so I can smell the flowers. And having now spoken with more than 1,000 Scientologists over the years, I've yet to find anybody who had a convincing exteriorization experience. I met one person who believed she could do it. She had done it before Scientology, but never did it again. Then you have Ingo Swann, who, of course, got involved with the CIA and cost them tens of millions of dollars, who again said that he'd not achieved his psychic abilities through Scientology. He already had them. So he was already nuts before he came along.
Right.
So apart from that, and I've talked with, the highest ranking Scientologists, people who did the class 12 course, like Otto Roos, who did it with Hubbard, and none of them, in fact, Otto gave me one experience where he thought he might have been exterior. And there's the story he had of Mary Sue Hubbard, who was, again, screaming at Hubbard on the ship about him being a charlatan and a fraud. And him saying, what do I have to do to convince you? And she said, I've never been exterior. So Otto was told to find every exteriorization process. I think he told me he found 90 and run them on Mary Sue until she went exterior. And eventually, after a few weeks, Mary Sue Hubbard just said, no more, I can't do any more. And that's the reality, this pretense which comes from Theosophy and many other places outside of Scientology. It's not original, that you can leave your body and do astral traveling, as it used to be called. Not seen any evidence of that. Not since Hubbard first announced it in 1952.
Nope. The total sum evidence of Scientology's... See, here's the trickery of this, and it's not contained in this book, so I'll just say it, is what's true for you is true, right? It's all subjective. The entire emphasis of Scientology's epistemology is that knowledge is wholly subjective. You decide the truth or falsity of a thing, and if it's true, period. So if you say you're out of your body, you see yourself in a disassociated state that we would consider to be actually maybe trauma-induced and maybe something that shouldn't be happening with you in a mentally good place, Hubbard wants to induce that. He wants to make you mentally unstable, make you disassociated, and then validate that state as proof that you're a Thetan. In a nutshell.
And you will be out of your head.
Yes.
I think that's a common expression. You will be out of your mind.
Yep.
Or as psychiatrists call it, you will be depersonalized. And so what people usually experience as exteriorization is the sense that they're no longer in their head.
Yep.
They're no longer perceiving from within, from the eyes, the nose, the ears, the perceptive. There's generally around the back of the neck is quite a common one I found. But they don't have any perception. They just have the feeling that they're dislocated. And this is frequently recorded as a psychiatric symptom, depersonalization. The other aspect of it is derealization, where you can't see the world as it is, but hallucinating, which also can happen in Scientology. I've met people that happened to.
Yeah.
Particularly when they're doing training routine 0.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple things that are real powerhouses in Scientology for inducing these states. And certain kinds of auditing are perfect for it, and the training routines, especially the training routine 0, and that's actually in this book later on. I don't know that we're going to get to it today, but
it looks like we're going to get to about page 12.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna carry on here. So anyway, the point of this, of course, being on this body Thetan thing, right? That I wanted to really stress. They're putting in right away. The body is not the person himself. It's very, very important to how Scientology does its magic that you believe this. It's not going to work on you. I'll go so far as to say it won't work if you don't.
You won't have the correct hallucinations.
Correct.
If you're not prepped, if you're not primed for them.
That's exactly right. That's saying it out loud. And here we are, exterior, right? They're going to go even more into this. In Scientology, it's been discovered the Thetan is separable from the body. When this occurs, we say the person is exterior, gone exterior, means the person, the Thetan, is moved out away from the body and is aware of himself as independent of a body, but still able to control and handle the body. Literally, exterior means on the outside. So they take, a little bit of truth and then a little bit of nonsense, a whole lot of nonsense, and here it is, right? You are now, or you have a goal or a purpose to be exterior. That's a thing in Scientology. It's an acknowledged reality, and we want to induce this state in you, is kind of the message of this page here, right? So we, outside of Scientology, have already said, right, we're talking about disassociation here. We're talking about trauma responses. We're talking about places you don't want to go, but it's exactly where Scientology wants to send you. And they're giving you this factual representation of the world that is not factual at all, right? That you have to adopt this new idea.
And at the other other end, there's trauma at one end, but there's mania at the other. And, you know, I have for sure seen mania induced in people during Scientology. Very early on, I met a guy who was covered in bandages and really happy, which is mania, hypomania. And he was saying that he'd walked through a plate glass door because he was exterior at the time. And kind of going, so being 3 feet back of your head might not be a very good idea then.
Exactly. And that's not the only time that we've heard stories. I've read case studies or CS, not case studies, but CS instructions from Hubbard, to remedy people who have hurt themselves, and the reason why is because they were outside of their body. Right? Absence
of mind, as it's called.
Ugh. So then we get, okay, so we have this exteriorization thing, right? Really important concept early on. You're getting it on like page 10 or whatever. Then we go to auditing, also called processing.
And we're not here going to define the word audit, which he initially did, which means to listen.
The principle of helping an